So I wake up this morning to get my kids ready for school, and something completely unexpected happens. An interview between, a right-wing, hard Christian Tucker Carlsen and the president of Iran pops up. And I mean, I can't tell you how cathartic it was for me to see what in my mind, although he's been against the Iran war, is the representative of the hard and aggressive America, Tucker Carlson, actually in a conversation, in a calm, civilized conversation with the president of it, with any Muslim premier, actually. This is such a break in what people of my age, 51, have been witnessing, since we started reading the newspapers and following the news. I must have been, 14 or 15 when the first Gulf War broke out. And I mean, I remember watching this, and then again after the World Trade Center crash, and seeing how, America at that time, it had this, there were like different coded color alerts for the population, like, is it orange today? Is it red today? Is it green? And, I remember watching this and saying that, what kind of impression, nobody can walk away from this experience without simply thinking that, all Muslims are terrorists and deranged murderers. And sadly, I mean, that's what happened in today's speak. The whole episode was just the worst branding nightmare that the Muslim world faced, and it's coming from America. And all these so-called honest and mainstream media outlets, CNN and all, been watching them all my life since I was in my mid-teens, and they've never been reasonable about this. And as an Indian, you're saying this way, you, from the age of 8 or 9, you've been seeing violence break out, you've seen terrorist attacks, you've seen assassinations, and this is not how we would respond. Even before I articulated this, I had sort of internalized that, when terrorist attacks happen, when assassinations happen, when they are said to have been done in the name of a particular religion or whatever it is, that the response that the body politic and a responsible government must have is first and foremost not to escalate the situation. And that, I mean, to some extent, this is just part of the life of a country. And so, of course, it has to be dealt with. But, it can't be seen as this sort of momentous and unique event which permits the receiving country to then respond in this momentous and unique manner, which, this unilateralist manner. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to pause it here because the bell just rang. So hold on, bear with me. So I mean, and the fact that you have a sitting head of government from a Muslim nation being spoken to on equal terms, it shouldn't actually be so striking, but just to see a white American talk to this other person as though he is capable of giving reasonable and sober responses is phenomenal. And so this is how deep the problem is. And I can only hope that this is going to change the conversation, and it's the beginning of that. Because one thing about America is that Americans are always open to a good idea. I mean, there's just something in the DNA in that nation, which I have not experienced in any other country. Even though Americans are generally conservative, that they are more socially conservative than Europeans and things like that. And I studied there only a year, but still, I feel that if you can give them a proposition, they're willing to listen to it and consider it. Okay, and so I think that this conversation might actually be the start of it. What was needed to turn the tide, because unless America learns to get a sense of history, and unless Americans are able to open their hearts and minds to the Muslim world, we are never going to get out of the horrible corner that we have been, shoved into by by these interventions in the Gulf, and then the war on terror. And I mean, isn't it extraordinary that this doesn't happen on a left-wing media outlet, and it doesn't even happen on a right-wing one? This is not on CNN or on BBC, and it's, on the other hand, it's not on Fox or whatever the other, mainstream right-wing channels are. It happens on a podcast. And what this is telling me is, actually what a lot of people have been saying about the Trump phenomena, which is that it's not as if there aren't people of goodwill and integrity around, but they've, the mainstream politics and mainstream journalism has just been hijacked by professionals. And I think that, in the 20th century, when we were there was a lot of technological development, and science and statistics were really taking over in industry and in economic understanding and in government policy for guiding the body politic. And a lot of intellectuals at the time criticized this and said that this was not a humane or sound basis on which we should be organizing ourselves, and many of the things that they said have come to pass today. But I believe that one thing which everyone has missed and which now really needs to be studied is indeed the professionalization of vast portions of our political life. Both as those who are politicians themselves, but also just us as citizens. Other than, sometimes it seems to me, other than that moment when you get up in the morning and you go and stand in the queue and you press the button on your candidate or put in your ballot paper, there is no aspect of the democratic process in any of these countries which hasn't become professionalized, and even professionals are well-meaning. I quit work years ago when I became a mom, so I stepped off the career ladder, and in some ways I just developed professionally, right? So this is my observation, and perhaps to some extent also my bias, but it's not that professionals are inherently good or bad people, but what happens about dealing with something in the professional mold is that you stop feeling, there's a sort of human element that is consciously taken out of the picture. And, to a certain extent, that's just going to have to happen, because professional life is specialized, and it also has to produce results. This combination of professional advice with a lot of money hanging on what you say, it's the effect then is to just freeze people into positions where nobody's going to turn around and say, well, that was your idea and that was really stupid and we've never done it like that before and now look where we are. And I twigged on to this, dynamic when, as a corporate lawyer, just before the world financial crash, there were all this explosion of initial public offerings, the securities exchange. There were so many deals happening there, and so I interfaced with these banks, and I was brought up by a former communist and current socialist, right? On both my parents, and I very much come from that world, and so it was always like I was very aware of this argument that a planned economy versus the free market, and in the free market, your imagination has no bounds, and you can strive for anything, and that's where you have innovation. And I used to look at these banks operating, and I was like, well, they are just functioning exactly like a big government bureaucracy, and it occurred to me then that so a lot of the ills of the planned economy and social, or whatever you want to call it, actually don't have to do with whether it's government or private or free market or planned market. It's simply a question of the size of the organization that you're looking at and the amount of money that's at stake. So so what's happened in of all the countries in the world, this has happened the most of all in the United States of America. And this is the reason why what happens is that it simply blocks the imagination. I was so excited when Obama was elected president. I had heard the speeches that he had made against one of the wars, and I seem to have spent a large part of my life just waiting for the Americans to say that they're going to stop going, that war against a Muslim country in response to terrorism or whatever is not the way forward, and that there has to be a proper understanding of the Muslim world, which is not all terrorists, right? So, for me, and there were, of course, and the fact that he was the first black president and so on, it was a glorious moment. And, and then he intervened in Libya. And, and even the way in which Osama bin Laden was just taken out in a hit operation, as a lawyer myself who studied constitutional law in America, I found that so appalling. This is not how the rule of law works. It doesn't matter what the other person did. You give them a fair trial, and there wasn't even a sham trial here. So I couldn't understand how. And Obama, anyway, let's not get distracted with that. So, I've just been sort of waiting for so long for this to happen. And, it looks like, and I'm seeing it on this, wacko, offbeat podcast, guy, and a Christian. But the thing, what I've always said is that, what Christians, Orthodox Christians or whatever, conservative Christians in the West have to realize that, look, conservative Muslims are your friend. On the social and the cultural issues, they are with you. And, so at several points in this conversation between Carlsen and the president of Iran, the question is, so what's going to happen with Iran now? Are you going to continue relying on your allies? And the president of Iran responds by saying, we believe in God. And the thing is that's exactly the language that conservative Christians use, and that's how they believe. That's the worldview of religiously conservative people. They frame their sort of the moral and principle basis of their actions and thoughts in terms of God being with them. And so yeah, in so many ways, a retired diplomat once told me, my father actually, that there is this idea that it's when extremists talk to each other that you actually can sometimes get results, because I don't remember what the logic was, but that's what they said. But maybe we are just kind of seeing the beginning of something here with that. And the other thing is that on the other side, I've always, in the last few years, I've been reading a lot of Gandhi and well, now Martin Luther King, and I've been going deep into the history of, the struggle of African Americans in the United States of America for full citizenship and equality and dignity. And I'm actually going to be putting up a play on it later on this year, on the eve of Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary, actually. And yeah, how did I get into this? So excited. So therefore, like this idea, when I start reading sort of figures for peace, non-violent movements that talk about redemption and reconciliation rather than revenge and counter aggression. And one of the things which comes, and this is an idea which is quite old, at least on the Indian subcontinent. There have been famous emperors like Ashoka who spoke of it, and there's this theme that you must be extremely careful with your words, and that you must not be violent in your words. And I always feel a bit guilty and start shifting in my seat when I read that, because like if anybody has been following my work, I tend to speak in a very forthright way. It certainly doesn't come naturally to me to be soft when I feel that the other person, the other side is really wrong, so I'm undying believer in non-violent struggle and activism, but very hard for me to incorporate this in speech. But anyway, I started thinking about this, and when the whole conversation turned to Iran and all after the bombings, and Trump and these other people are saying that they go out on the streets and then they chant death to Iran and death to America. And like I've said death to America, like I have American relatives and I'm making fun of them. Or when I was at university, it was kind of like a joke. But I was thinking then that like I wish. See, the impression that goes out when you use that kind of language, it's not helpful, and even though as a Shia state, Iran is kind of quite, separate from the majority of the Muslim world and what's been happening and all, still, in the public mind, especially in the West, they don't know any history, and, so this kind of language kind of becomes a representation of the whole of the Muslim world, and it's simply not helpful, right? And so I was, for the first time in my life, I was like, maybe we, this language shouldn't be used. Okay. And so anyway, but it actually came up. So can you imagine the sight? This white guy, a white Christian, MAGA, is sitting there across from the president of Iran, and he directly asked him sometimes like the naivety itself is something so refreshing and can open a new chapter in this whole episode of human experience, and just says, why, what is the meaning of these chants of death to America? And, the Iranian president responded. He responded by saying that it's not meant literally, it's not, meant in terms of, killing any American or even any American official, but it's, used, he didn't say the word metaphorically, but it's a slogan that is protesting American bullying, that is protesting, interventions in Iran. And, it took a lot of maturity even for this Iranian president, or maybe again it's naivety, the naivety of both sides, the people who've been closed off from each other, that he could have just said that these are people on the street and it's got nothing to do with the government of Iran, and to tell me one official statement from my government was saying death to America, right? But he just explained it in those terms, and Tucker Carlson didn't fight him. He listened to it, and then the conversation moved on. So, this is a glorious, oh, happy day. This is a very, very special moment. And I think that, well-meaning people across the world should be watching this and learning from it. This is just some way of, this is just a sort of eccentricity in what is going on. The machine is much bigger and on track and all that. But, these are the things that we have to look at and think about. And it's extremely important. At the end of the day, we are not going to get out of any mess from either, the efforts of MAGA, of the MAGA groups or the alt-right or even the mainstream right. They don't have the tools that are needed to get out of the place that we find ourselves in the world today. And I'm also increasingly beginning to think that, when people like Gandhi and the leaders from W.E.B. Du Bois to Martin Luther King said that there has to be a loving non-violent resistance to problems of repression, aggression, and racism and discrimination from the other side. This was not only because of the morality of that, but it's also because if you actually want to resolve these problems, the only way is through this. This loving ideal. I don't really see any way out of it, and when my husband wanted to marry me, at one point my parents were asking me, well, you're like, why aren't you saying yes to this guy? Like, he's so well educated, he speaks so well, he's got much better, cleaner mouth than you, young lady, And so I remember telling my dad that, I'm just not sure about him on the Palestinian issue. So, and I had this argument with my husband. At that time, we were dating about it, and and then several months or maybe even a year or so later, when we did get engaged, so my father sort of tentatively asked me, so what made you change your mind? And I said, one of the things that I told him was that after we had this conversation, he went off and then he came back a few days later and he told me, what, I've been like reading up on the BBC about this whole Palestinian issue, and I think you have something there. So anyway, that's how important this Palestinian issue is in my mind, and I think I'm a very typical sort of coming from the whole left-wing clan in feeling that way. Although the Palestinians that I actually met when I was studying in England, one of them just turned around and told me that everybody thinks that Palestine is their issue except and has a view on it, but what about people like me who are actually Palestinian, which give me some pause. But yeah, so, but the thing is that I think about the Palestinian issue, and their struggle began just around the time that we were on the eve of getting our own independence. And it's now been, so many years, 77 years or whatever it was, 17. And it's not moved any further. So with all the sympathy in the world and with, all the hurt against Israel and anger against Zionism, I mean, how many more years of this kind of fighting are we going to see in this kind of situation before we realize that this doesn't work? How many years? Okay, so that's my question that I want to throw out. And the other thing that I want to say to well-meaning, so the thing is that, well-meaning people in America, that are, Democrats and all of that, they have to extend themselves a lot more. They have to now, put away your professional cap. Okay, the fact that the good guys were not able to see it this way, and it's maddies like Trump who see it this way, you have to get beyond saying like, how is this maddie going around? You have to think about, why is it that you were not able to come up with this, and they can be nothing as lethal in a conflict situation as the inability to imagine, to think creatively. Martin Luther King said that, he used to say that, it has to be a creative resistance. So, if you don't think creatively, what is a fight? Ultimately, a conflict is a situation in which both sides are stuck. So how to unstick? You need this, the imagination has to be able to roam free, and you also, there has to be a freedom to make mistakes and to wait, and not produce an immediate result, because a strong tactics can, if you're the strongest country in the world, can produce short-term strong results, but not solutions, and there's a difference between the two. And so I think that, Democrats have to, and everyone in the Jewish community also has to understand. So, when I was at university, both in England as well as in America. In America, of course, I was at NYU, which has a lot of a big Jewish student body. But I mean, for me, the only Jewish people that I knew were highly educated, very refined, very civilized, And so I kind of assumed, without following Zionism and right-wing, Israeli politics too closely, that, as much as I may disagree with it, I assumed that they would be as intellectual and all as the people that I knew. But now in India, with this awful toxic teaming up of the Modi regime with Netanyahu's, boys, you see, I suddenly, I would see like this stuff occasionally on social media from right-wing Israeli trollers, and they were sounding as uneducated, as uninformed, as spiteful, vicious, and, ultimately silly, but so dangerously silly when the stakes are so high, as any of these completely educated 2 rupee trolls that the Modi regime has through its party's IT cell on social media. It was a real, I know, it gave me a turn, because I only knew the Jewish people as like great artists, great intellectuals, and very funny, brilliant, and so on. So what I'm telling the world is that it's the Modi regime and that whole ecosystem has got so much wind in the sails from the the view of Muslims and the Islamic world that America propagates, by word, by action, by act and omission. And we really, especially before the last general election, now these guys, that they've been sort of given a bloody nose, so they've backed off. But listen, world, we were honestly on the edge of transforming from the nation of Mahatma Gandhi to a nation of 1.4 billion fascists. Can you imagine? And, Indians have spread all over the world. And the seed of this poison, which too many Indians have today, will be carried by them all over the world. They will enter your universities, your politics, they will enter your body politics with these horrible ideas which were developed in India at the time of the rise of fascism and Nazism in Europe. When people, this was before the colonies fell. So at that time, people believed that, some of them even saw them as rebels against the imperialist forces. So, there were many thinkers in India and politically active people who endorsed these guys, or at least saw them, we can ally with them because we are being repressed by these so-called, democracies of the world in any case. So, and the Indians have just, I'm saying in this very condescending way that Americans must develop a sense of history, but Indians don't have a sense of history either. And, in our case, we've been so poor and our educational infrastructure has been so bad that now, we have this huge middle class which is coming into its own, but they don't know anything. They literally don't know anything. They can do, and this is one of the reasons why so many Indians are going into these like low level IT cell and software engineering and other technical jobs, because those are things that you can do without having a very wide base of knowledge about anything else. And traditionally, Indians, they do have another, other than formal schooling, they had this wide base of knowledge in the deep culture, which was, those were also individual knowledge systems that, you can, if you pass through them, you can acquire an understanding of the world, a wisdom and a maturity that is as good as any education. So, because, I work with artists, with traditional, musicians, with folk artists, and I have experienced that, and generally I've experienced that. So I'm not making a reflection on the Indian character just because the school system has failed. But what's happening in the new middle class is that they are actually actively rejecting the traditional way. Even when they are Hindu chauvinists and Hindu fanatics and so on, they are not very traditional in their lifestyle, in their approach, and so they call themselves Hindu because their version of Hinduism is saying the name of a Hindu god as loudly and aggressively as possible. But they have radically cut themselves off from our traditional roots. So as a result, you're just having these people, they're a clean slate, and they can be made to do anything. That's what happens, right? That's the stuff of these horrible fascist pogroms that have happened in the world for the last century and a half. And this has to be taken very, very seriously. And your support for Netanyahu's Israel is also supporting people like Modi out here, and is supporting this whole horrible, aggressive, fascist worldview. And one thing I'll say, the difference between the global north and the global south is that the global north went through several cycles of struggle, of political struggle and violence and social conflict before arriving at democracy as the constitutional democracy, as the way in which they were going to organize the body politics. So the democratic temper has been sort of inculcated in a much deeper and richer and stable, unshakable way in the global north than anywhere in the global south. And unfortunately, I'm now discovering this about India as well. And at the end of the day, it's not the forms of democracy that make a body politic reliably democratic. It's not the forms, because you can go through elections and all of that. It's the democratic temper. It is this almost automatic sort of resort to argumentation, debate, parliamentary processes, and also the ability to expect that to be challenged by an opponent, to be nose to nose. For me as an Indian, when I look at the British Parliament, you have these two opposing parties separated by a slim table, literally nose to nose, and the language that is used is so strong, punching each other. But there's a reason for that. I used to just look upon it as entertainment or great oratory, but actually, those are societies where you have actually taken this decision to express the violence and all, and to resolve through talk instead of other ways. Now, I can tell you, Indians don't have that. Even highly educated left-wing Indians don't have that. Whenever I'm in a conversation with an Indian leftist, especially one who's a professor, they are so dogmatic, they're so angry at being questioned. So, and generally in India, the way is that, you listen to those who are better than you, those who are in a position of authority, those who are elder. So to answer back, and skepticism and questioning and analytical thinking are actually, for Indians, deeply disrespectful acts, and also self-destructive ones. Okay, so in some ways that's good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we've been able to preserve just because we are willing to sit and listen to the experience of those before us. So I'm not saying that's all bad, but it certainly does not help to produce a rich and stable and truly understood and felt democratic temper. So whatever you saw happening in Europe in the Second World War, if the social conditions are allowed to fester and just grow like over here in India, it'll be several times worse. It'll be much worse even than anything that Stalin did, because there is no limits. At least communists believed, at least as an ideal in a peasant revolution. These guys today, the only ideal that they believe in is that that the Hindus should be in a position where they are in control. This is their country, and then whatever they say should go, and everybody else has to listen. I mean, there is almost nothing else of substance among these people. So can you imagine people of this mentality running a fascist state? And it's not just the guys on top. Those guys, they'll do whatever. They're like all politicians. They'll blow with the wind. But it's the people of India who are like this, especially the middle class. So, so you guys and they're getting all this support from these Israeli right-wingers. It's sick. It's really bad. So you have to take this situation very seriously. If America keeps seeing this now, the left-wing media is just seeing the whole episode with India and Pakistan, as well as with Israel and Iran, as a way to poke fun of and bash Trump. But politics, your internal politics is not the only thing at stake here. And, I challenge anyone listening to this, give me an example of anything worse than 1.4 mostly uneducated Indian fascists. Please tell me 1.4 billion. And can you imagine how long it would take to roll that back? If ever. And how much death and destruction would have to happen? Just think about it. So, everybody has to really, really grow up. And please watch Tucker Carlson's interview with the Iranian president. Peace be upon the world. May we get out of all these horrible situations. Mm.